Hey guys, so I told you I was going to cover the Stalwart Defender before my stream on Saturday at 1 p.m. Central Time, where I'm going to go over raid developments. So, let's just get right into this. So, of course, first we gotta talk about the dedication. In order to take this dedication, you either need to have been trained by dwarfs or be a dwarf yourself. Of course, if your GM doesn't care about the uncommon tag, then you can just take them. But for society play, yeah, you gotta be a dwarf or have been trained by a dwarf. This dedication gives you the Tenacious Stance action. You must be wearing armor in order to enter this stance. That means Fuse Stance is most likely off the table, because that is a monk-only feat, and most monk stances require you to be unarmored. As long as you are in this stance, you gain temporary hit points equal to half your level, minimum 1. You also gain a +2 circumstance bonus against being shoved or tripped. But the downside to this is that when you're in this stance, you no longer negate the speed penalty or armor check penalty for having a high strength. Thus, it is harder for you to use athletics actions, and your speed is going to be reduced by your armor. When you leave this stance, you lose all temporary hit points and become immune to gaining temporary hit points from Tenacious Stance for 1 minute. But you can still go into the stance to get that +2 bonus against being shoved or tripped. And remember, while Fuse Stance won't work and you can only be in one stance at a time, you can use other actions while in this stance. For example, raging. Unfortunately, the temporary hit points from rage and this stance won't stack. But you could go into rage after you lose the temporary hit points from this stance, and still get that +2 against being shoved or tripped, as well as the benefits of rage. Just something to think about. Before we get into the new feats, I should talk about 3 feats that are available to this archetype that are also available to the Sentinel archetype. I'm thinking most of you probably know what these feats can do, but in case you're new to this system, I'll very quickly explain what they do. First, we have Steel Skin, which allows you to sleep in your armor without being fatigued. Then it's Armored Rebuff, which allows you to push an enemy back by rebounding their own attack. And finally, Mighty Bulwark, allowing you to increase the bonus from the Bulwark trait to 4 and use it on all reflex saves, not just damaging ones. Mountain Skin gives you training in medium and heavy armor, and anytime a class feature would increase your proficiency with any armor, you also gain that proficiency with the armors associated with this feat. So basically, if you become an expert in light armor, you also gain expert in medium and heavy if you have this feat. Also at this level, we've got Tunnel Wall. If you're in Tenacious Stance, then you can spend one action to raise a shield and become anchored. While anchored, you get a +4 bonus to the DC against attempts to tumble through your space. So, this feat essentially makes it much harder for dex-based opponents to get past you to your allies. The only problem is you do have to be using a shield to use this action. Thus, this feat isn't great for everyone. At level 6, we're going to start with Crushing Step. With this feat, we ignore difficult terrain from non-magical sources, as long as we're wearing medium or heavy armor. In addition, if we're a master in the armor that we're wearing, then we ignore greater difficult terrain from non-magical sources. That is really going to help with that speed penalty. That seems to be the main purpose of this feat. Then we've also got Gravel Guts. This gives us a +1 circumstance bonus to saving throws against the sickened condition. In addition, if we succeed on a fortitude save to remove the sickened condition, we reduce it by 2 or 3 on a critical success, rather than 1. Sickened is one of the worst conditions to be under, but it's also pretty rare, at least from my experience. So this feat can be a little situational. But if you're getting sickened a lot, this is a great feat to pick up. We've also got Upset Balance at this level. So if we're in Tenacious Stance and we get hit by a melee attack, we can use this reaction. This allows us to make an athletics check against the opponent's reflex DC. If we succeed, the attacker becomes Clumsy 1 or Clumsy 2 on a critical failure until the end of its next turn. And if you're anchored, you get a +2 bonus on this check. So if you've used Tunnel Wall before this, you get a +2 on the check, making up for the penalty you take for being in Tenacious Stance. We've also got a couple of level 8 feats, starting with Rupture Stomp. For 2 actions, you can create a 10-foot emanation of difficult terrain around yourself. But if you're a master in the armor you're wearing, this becomes greater difficult terrain. This reverts back to normal terrain after 1 minute. You can also take this feat a second time at level 16 to use it once per hour instead of once per day. Again, you too have to be in Tenacious Stance to use this. This isn't quite as good as the Champion's Divine Wall, but it's pretty close. This one is a great one to pick up if you're trying to be defensive but you aren't a champion. We've also got Unshaken in Iron. You gain the armor specialization effects of all armor that you're trained in. Also, while in Tenacious Stance, you gain a bonus to the armor specialization effects equal to your armor check penalty. So, like, for instance, if you're wearing plate armor, you gain +3 to the resistance if you're in Tenacious Stance. So this just makes you even more defensive than you already were, which of course is fantastic. 3 new feats left, starting with Gathering Moss. While you're in Tenacious Stance, once per day for a free action, you can gain fast healing equal to your level for 1 minute or until you leave the stance. So again, even more defense. Cracked Mountain is essentially Orc Ferocity, except you can only use it while in Tenacious Stance. You also get a melee attack against a creature that's within your reach. However, using this feat immediately ends your Tenacious Stance. So now Dwarves essentially have Orc Ferocity as a class feat, which is fantastic given how many hit points Dwarves can get. And lastly, we have Stony Body. For 1 action, once per hour, we can gain Resistance 10 to all damage if we are in Tenacious Stance. However, this only lasts until the end of your next turn or until you are critically hit. In other words, this is best used when you're low on health and an encounter is almost over. Overall, I gotta say that Dwarves have become much more defensive now. You don't need to be an Orc to be super defensive anymore. But this archetype isn't great for champions. Or monks, obviously. But if you're something like a fighter or a barbarian, this archetype is fantastic. As I think with this archetype, you could probably be on par with a champion. Not in AC, obviously, but you can get a lot of the defensive nature of a champion with this archetype if you're another class. So, be sure to tune in on Saturday for my stream of Rage of Elements. It's at 1 p.m. Central Time. I was also part of a game that's designed to teach new players how to play the game with the local disaster tour guide and the Bad Luck Gamer. Links to both of those channels are in the description. If you want to learn about my opinion on whether or not they're nerfing casters with the remaster preview, you can check out this video here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, teamwork is vital.